The night had a weight that pressed down from the sky, dark and suffocating, and every step forward felt like walking through a storm that refused to break. The ex-husband's shadow had stretched longer than ever that evening, threatening to close in, and the memory of every harsh word, every controlling glance, every tense silence played on repeat in the mind. The city streets were empty, lights flickering in a rhythm that made the heart race even faster. Fear had a pulse, and it coursed through every vein, making each step feel urgent, desperate, impossible to slow. There was nowhere to hide, or so it seemed, until a figure emerged, not from the crowd but from the shadows themselves. The presence was sudden, almost unreal, as though the universe had placed this stranger there for reasons impossible to predict. The initial shock of seeing someone so close in that moment of terror brought a sharp intake of breath. Every instinct screamed to run, to escape, yet something in the way he looked, calm, controlled, aware, pulled forward rather than away. There was an energy that couldn't be ignored, something both thrilling and terrifying, a dangerous allure that demanded attention even while caution burned bright. The first words exchanged were simple, almost mundane, but in the context of fear, they carried the weight of a lifeline. The voice was low, steady, a calm in the storm, yet laced with an undercurrent that suggested a depth far beyond casual conversation. Every syllable vibrated with intent, with purpose, and even though the situation was precarious, even though danger lurked in the edges of awareness, the heart thudded against the ribs, awakening a sensation that had lain dormant under layers of caution and mistrust. It was as if the chaos of fear had created a vacuum, and this stranger, unexpected, unplanned, had filled it with a force that demanded attention. A decision had to be made, not thought through, not calculated, but instinctual. The ex-husband's voice, imagined and threatening, pushed forward a primal need to flee, to evade, to survive. And yet, the choice that presented itself, though impulsive, carried a different kind of urgency. A kiss, fleeting yet electric, a connection made in the heartbeat of danger. The lips met briefly, and the moment stretched beyond comprehension, a second that defied the ordinary, that defied reason. It was not about love, at least not yet, but about survival and the awakening of something far more powerful, an invisible thread that tied hearts and bodies together before even knowing the depth of what was unfolding. There was an immediate recognition of the tension that ran between the two of them, a spark that ignited from the collision of worlds, one of fear, the other of control, both coexisting in a dangerous harmony. The stranger's hands, steady yet strong, created a safety net against the chaos, guiding, supporting, holding without question. Each touch carried weight, not just of muscle and proximity, but of intention, of understanding. There was an unspoken acknowledgement that the world was unstable, but within this bubble of proximity, for these fleeting moments, there was a sanctuary carved out by desire and instinct. It was an understanding that survival could be intimate, that danger could be sensual, that the body and heart could awaken under circumstances neither should have expected. The intensity of the night heightened every sensation, the cold bite of air against the skin, the rapid pulse in the neck, the tremor that traveled through the spine with each look exchanged. The stranger's presence was not just magnetic, it was a revelation. It made the blood sing, the senses sharpen, the mind dance on the edge of recklessness. There was something intoxicating in the blend of fear and fascination, a dangerous cocktail that neither reason nor caution could dilute. Desire, once buried under years of vigilance and control, surged forward with a force that was overwhelming in its honesty. It was raw, it was urgent, it was uncontainable. In those moments, the city and its dangers faded into the background. The ex-husband's shadow, the fear of exposure, the awareness of risk, all of it became secondary to the connection that had sparked in the collision of their lives. Each glance, each touch, each hesitant but deliberate motion carried with it a message. There was more here than fear, more here than chance. It was as if the universe had paused, allowing a private narrative to unfold, one of proximity and attraction, of instinctual understanding that transcended words. The kiss, which began as an act of instinctual avoidance, transformed into a conduit for something neither had anticipated. Hearts beat faster not just from adrenaline, but from recognition, a visceral understanding of what had been dormant and what now demanded attention. Fingers brushed, hands lingered, and the air between them thickened with tension and unspoken questions. There was no need to speak of intent or expectation. The body communicated in ways the mind had long forgotten. Fear and thrill intertwined, creating a pulse of intimacy that was as dangerous as it was intoxicating. Time seemed to suspend. Every sound of the city, the distant hum of traffic, the flicker of neon, the whisper of the wind, was absorbed into the background of this electric exchange. It was a night of survival turned into a night of awakening, of a pulse that had been muted by circumstance suddenly resounding with clarity. The stranger was not just a savior from immediate danger. He became a mirror for desire, a reflection of what had been denied and ignored for far too long. Even as logic threatened to reclaim control, even as the mind whispered of caution, of danger, of consequences, the heart insisted on remaining in the moment. Desire, raw and unfiltered, surged forward with an insistence that was impossible to ignore. There was a beauty in the peril, a thrill in surrender, a revelation in connection. The stranger, unknowable and yet intensely present, embodied a force that demanded engagement, that awakened instincts buried under years of restraint, that challenged the very definition of what it meant to feel alive. And when the night finally began to stretch toward an uncertain dawn, there was no regret, only a lingering awareness that something fundamental had shifted. What started as a desperate act to avoid fear had transformed into the recognition of a force neither anticipated but both could not deny. The pulse of connection, the thrum of desire, the surge of awakening, these were not temporary. They were markers of a new path, a path born in the collision of peril and attraction. And in that suspended moment, standing on the edge of fear and longing, it became impossible to deny that what had begun as escape had awakened something far more profound, an undeniable, irresistible desire that would not be ignored. The first time the eyes met, it felt like stepping into a world that both terrified and exhilarated in equal measure. There was an intensity there, something unspoken that demanded attention, a magnetic pull that made the heart beat faster despite the mind screaming to stay cautious. The stranger wasn't merely a man. He was an enigma, a storm contained within a controlled exterior, someone whose very presence hinted at a life layered with secrets, power, and danger. Every glance carried weight, a subtle challenge, an invitation wrapped in the kind of mystery that made the air itself hum. It was impossible to turn away, even knowing that stepping closer would mean stepping into forbidden territory, a boundary neither should cross but instinct whispered to test. The first moments of proximity were charged. The air between them was alive with tension, thick and electric, each movement deliberate yet effortless, a hand brushed accidentally, or perhaps intentionally, against mine, sending a shiver down the spine. It was a touch that both startled and calmed, a paradox that made the pulse race. There was an understanding, unspoken yet undeniable, that vulnerability was part of this exchange. Neither dared speak of consequences or moral constraints. Words seemed unnecessary in a space where presence alone conveyed the gravity of desire. Every heartbeat became a language, every breath a confession. As the night deepened, so did the connection. His world, hinted at in fragments, subtle gestures, the way others deferred to him, the shadow of danger that clung to his every movement, was far removed from anything ordinary. Yet, within that peril, The intimacy shared felt authentic, raw, impossible to ignore. The contrast was intoxicating. The danger amplified the attraction, turning every stolen glance, every fleeting brush of fingers, into a combustible moment that left the chest tight and the mind clouded with anticipation. Lust and trust, vulnerability and power, collided in a dance neither could control, yet both surrendered to willingly. There was a moment, suspended in time, when lips met. It wasn't a gentle kiss, it wasn't tentative. It carried the weight of the unspoken, the collision of worlds, the thrill of the forbidden. Every nerve screamed, a mixture of fear and anticipation, but the desire, raw and consuming, eclipsed all rational thought. It was a kiss that told stories words could never capture. Stories of longing, of need, of the kind of connection that strikes with both tenderness and intensity. The mind attempted to remind of limits, to whisper of boundaries, but the heart and body moved with a force impossible to resist. Each encounter deepened the sense of vulnerability. Standing close, feeling the warmth of proximity, there was an understanding that secrets lay beneath the surface, stories not shared, lives carefully guarded, choices made in shadows. Yet in that intimacy there was freedom, a paradoxical liberation born from the forbidden nature of the connection. Every touch, every lingering look, felt like trespassing into something sacred and dangerous at once. It was the kind of intimacy that left the chest tight with anticipation, the stomach churning with excitement and anxiety, the mind and body aligned in a way that was both intoxicating and disorienting. It wasn't just desire, it was a revelation. The forbidden element added gravity, turning what might have been a fleeting attraction into a consuming force. There was an awareness of boundaries, a recognition that crossing them could come with consequences, yet that awareness only sharpened the intensity. The danger wasn't a deterrent, it was a catalyst. Each heartbeat, each brush of hands, each shared look became more potent, more urgent, as if the risk itself were part of the seduction. The intimacy wasn't just physical, it was an emotional tightrope, a balancing act where trust and tension intertwined, where every gesture carried weight beyond the surface. Even in quiet moments, the connection lingered. Words became unnecessary, glances and proximity spoke volumes. There was a shared understanding that neither was ordinary, that both were aware of the storm surrounding them, yet chose to exist in this space where desire and danger coexisted. It was a paradox that demanded surrender, surrender to the magnetic pull, surrender to the vulnerability, surrender to a passion that existed outside conventional rules. Every heartbeat was a reminder of the thrill, every breath a testament to the intoxicating pull of forbidden closeness. The world beyond that moment, the one of rules, obligations, and normalcy, felt distant, almost unreal. In this space, the only reality was the heat of presence, the tension of connection, the undeniable pull of something that was both dangerous and essential. The mind attempted to catalog, to categorize, to understand, but the heart moved beyond reason, embracing the paradox with a willingness that surprised. The combination of fear, excitement, and unrestrained attraction created a chemistry that could not be ignored, a force that demanded acknowledgement and participation, whether ready or not. And in the quiet aftermath, when the immediacy of proximity faded but the pulse of memory remained, there was a lingering awareness of transformation. What had begun as curiosity, as instinctual interest, had grown into something far more consuming. A recognition of the depth of desire, the intensity of attraction, and the irresistible power of forbidden intimacy. It was a bond that existed beyond logic, beyond circumstance, beyond the safe confines of ordinary life. It was raw, unfiltered, and unforgettable. It was a night, a touch, a connection that shifted everything, leaving only the undeniable truth that the heart, once awakened to something forbidden and profound, could never return to its prior state. The night carried a weight I had grown used to carrying alone, a heaviness stitched into every memory, every choice, every scar that life had left behind. The betrayal that lingered in the corners of my mind had hardened me. Fear had become a constant companion, and the echoes of past mistakes whispered warnings I could no longer ignore. Yet when the stranger appeared, it wasn't as an intrusion. It was as if the universe had finally cracked open a door I had forgotten existed, a doorway to something raw, primal, and achingly alive. The first time our eyes met, it wasn't the ordinary recognition of a passing stranger. It was a spark, subtle yet insistent, a call to awaken something I had long buried under years of caution and pain. The air between us was charged in a way I could feel in my chest, like static running along nerves that hadn't been touched in years. There was a magnetic tension that neither of us could name, but both of us responded to instinctively. Fear wanted to take over, to retreat, to hide behind old walls of self-protection, yet desire, awe, and unexpected, pulled forward, insisting that it be felt, that it be acknowledged. And then, as if time slowed to a heartbeat, a kiss came, not hesitant, not careful, but full of urgency and unspoken understanding. The lips that met mine were neither gentle nor casual. They were a declaration of presence, of intensity, of the kind of closeness that demanded surrender. It was more than the physical sensation. It was a deep stirring, something that unmoored emotions I hadn't dared to face in years. Memories of trust betrayed, of love withheld, of walls built to keep people out. All of it seemed to dissolve in that single act. The world beyond that instant ceased to exist. Only the warmth of the moment remained, the primal awareness that connection could exist even amid chaos and pain. Every heartbeat, every shiver, every small movement became a language of its own, a dialogue that bypassed reason and spoke directly to the parts of the heart I thought had been sealed forever. As closeness grew, the vulnerability was undeniable. There was an unspoken agreement, fragile yet steadfast, that in this space nothing had to be hidden, nothing had to be controlled. Trust was not given lightly. It was earned in the way his hand rested against my back, in the way his gaze held mine without judgment, in the way the silence between words was as profound as any conversation. The kiss had been a catalyst, yes, but it was the ensuing nearness, the warmth, the intimacy of proximity that truly awakened a hunger I hadn't realized I possessed. It was emotional, yes, but also instinctive, a call to surrender, to allow oneself to feel fully, without fear of consequence, without a script to follow. I could feel every instinct sharpen. Every nerve in my body seemed attuned to him, to the scent, the warmth, the subtle rhythms of his breathing. It was intoxicating, almost overwhelming. The sensation was not simply desire, it was recognition, a primal understanding that connection could be transformative. Layers of caution peeled away, revealing a raw need to be seen, to be known, to be understood without pretense. And in that revelation, there was also fear, the old familiar fear of being hurt again, of opening the heart and finding it broken. But it was tempered by a thrill I hadn't experienced in a long time, a daring sense that perhaps some risks were worth taking, that some awakenings were worth gamble. Every touch became a conversation, fingers tracing the curve of a shoulder, a hand lingering at the small of the back, a brush of lips against skin. It was language without words, an exchange that bypassed intellect and spoke directly to the heart. It was a reminder that vulnerability could be intoxicating, that intimacy could exist without promises, without labels, without certainty. It was raw and consuming, yet gentle in its insistence, challenging the boundaries I had so meticulously constructed. There was a paradox in it. The more I surrendered, the stronger I felt, the freer, the more alive. In the stillness that followed each intense moment, there was reflection. Fear whispered, reminding me of the past, of mistakes made, of hearts broken, of dangers known and unknown. Yet beneath that fear, desire persisted, not just the physical need for closeness, but the emotional hunger for connection, for acknowledgement, for the kind of intimacy that healed as much as it ignited. Each glance carried questions and confessions, a subtle unraveling of armor long worn. And in the presence of the stranger, there was permission to feel, to want, to need, to surrender to the storm of emotion without shame or hesitation. The intensity of the night was such that time itself seemed to bend. Each kiss, each touch, each quiet breath shared in close proximity carried weight far beyond the surface. The kiss had unlocked something that years of caution had tried to suppress. It had shattered the shell built by betrayal and fear, leaving space for emotional awakening, a hunger for a connection that was as profound as it was frightening. It was a lesson in trust, in surrender, in the power of being fully present with someone who demanded nothing and yet gave everything in their presence. By the time the night waned and the reality of the outside world began to creep back in, there was no denying that something fundamental had shifted. The kiss, the closeness, the intimacy, they had awakened a longing for more than fleeting pleasure. They had opened the door to emotional courage, to recognition that the heart could still dare, could still feel, could still desire without apology. It was an awakening that would linger, a spark that could not be extinguished, a recognition that love, connection, and passion could coexist even after betrayal, even after fear, even after scars had been carved into the soul. And as the first light touched the horizon, there was only the truth of that moment. The heart once awakened could never truly close again. The city was quiet that night, but the weight of the past pressed in like a storm about to break. Every shadow seemed a reminder, every passing glance a trigger, a whisper of memories long buried, pain, betrayal, regret, and fear wrapped tightly around the heart. The ex-husband's shadow still lingered, though miles of avoidance and months of careful distance had been attempted. Trauma leaves echoes that never quite fade, and danger, even when not immediate, has a way of curling itself around every choice. And yet, despite the tension of past scars and the looming uncertainty of what could happen next, something unexpected unfolded, something so powerful it demanded recognition, a connection that both terrified and intoxicated. The first time his eyes met mine, there was an undeniable intensity that both unsettled and drew in. It wasn't the ordinary spark of attraction. It was something deeper, something that seemed to peer past defenses and see into hidden corners of fear and longing. There was a sense of awareness in him, a subtle knowing that made the chest tighten and the pulse quicken. The world outside, the danger, the shadows, the scars, faded for brief moments into the background, leaving only the heat of presence, the tension of proximity, and the irresistible force of connection. It started small, with shared glances that lingered longer than appropriate, with touches that seemed accidental but carried weight neither could deny. Each contact was a conversation, an exchange that bypassed words entirely. The hands that brushed, the shoulders that aligned, the subtle tilt of the head, all of it became a language of desire, of understanding, of unspoken acknowledgement of danger and possibility coexisting. It was a paradox that both excited and terrified, to feel so strongly in a space where every choice felt precarious, where every heartbeat carried the risk of exposure, yet the pull to engage was impossible to resist. The first kiss was not tentative. It carried urgency and intensity, a collision of vulnerability and desire that left reason scrambling to catch up. Lips met, hearts raced, and in that contact there was an unspoken promise, or at least an acknowledgement, that connection could exist even in peril, that intimacy could be both tender and consuming, and that love, unexpected, shocking, and transformative, often comes wrapped in risk. The kiss lingered, not just on the lips but in the chest, in the mind, in the awareness that something profound was unfolding. Each encounter after that intensified the sense of contradiction. Danger lurked in every glance, every whispered word. Yet the bond deepened, not just through physical proximity, but through the emotional surrender it demanded. Trust became a delicate dance, vulnerability an act of courage, and the thrill of uncertainty a powerful aphrodisiac. Every heartbeat, every brush of skin, every glance shared in the charged silence of the night reinforced the paradox. Love in this context was both tender and consuming, a blend of risk and reward that made every moment unforgettable. There were nights when fear pressed in, when the weight of past trauma and the constant threat of exposure made retreat seem sensible, necessary even, but the connection refused to be ignored. It pulled forward with an insistence that left no room for hesitation. Hands found each other despite caution, breaths mingled despite awareness, and moments of vulnerability were met with gentle strength that encouraged surrender. The world outside, danger, past wounds, uncertainty, remained real, yet within the bubble of proximity, there was freedom, intimacy, and the kind of understanding that transforms. Every shared moment became a revelation. The tension of the forbidden, the thrill of proximity, the beauty of unexpected tenderness, these combined to form something neither had anticipated, but both recognized instinctively. Desire was not simply physical, it was emotional, spiritual even, a force that stirred the heart and challenged old fears. Every touch, every lingering gaze, every whispered word became a testament to the power of connection against the odds, proof that love could exist even when the world seemed determined to remind you that it shouldn't. The nights blurred into early mornings, and with each passing hour, the intensity of the bond deepened. There was a rhythm to proximity, a dance of closeness and retreat, of daring and caution that neither could resist. Vulnerability met strength, fear met courage, desire met restraint, and in that interplay, the heart discovered a new language, a language of surrender, of awakening, of acknowledging that love could shock, excite, and transform even in the midst of danger. It was both exhilarating and frightening, a combination that left the mind reeling and the soul alive in ways long forgotten. Even when apart, the connection lingered, echoing in quiet moments, in the brush of a memory, in the pulse of a heartbeat. It was a reminder that the bond formed was not casual or fleeting. It had been forged in moments of intensity and danger, in the interplay of tenderness and risk, and it demanded recognition. There was no denying that love in this context required courage, that it demanded willingness to confront fear, that it thrived in uncertainty. And yet the reward was profound, the awakening of desire, the deepening of trust, the discovery that hearts could open even after trauma, even when danger loomed, even when reason advised retreat. Every encounter reinforced the truth that desire, connection, and love often come wrapped in the paradox of risk. To surrender fully was terrifying, yet utterly transformative. To trust again in the shadow of past wounds was both reckless and necessary. And as the nights stretched on, filled with tension, closeness, and undeniable intimacy, it became impossible to ignore the reality. The bond formed in these moments was not only a challenge to the scars of the past, but a revelation of what love could be when allowed to thrive against the odds. And when the first light of dawn began to creep across the horizon, there was no doubt left. The heart, once opened amidst fear and danger, could never close again. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more tales that explore the thrill of desire, the power of forbidden love, and the courage it takes to open a heart against all odds. Your support keeps these stories alive, and there's so much more waiting. Moments that will make your heart race, emotions that will leave you breathless, and connections that defy every expectation. Click subscribe, hit the bell, and stay with us for every heartbeat, every kiss, and every awakening yet to come.